I am Dr. Paul Prue. I have to put it on the slide so I remember it. And if you haven't already, parking passes are available if you parked in the visitor lot, the other thing that I would forget to mention. And so Karen back there will politely give you one of those parking passes if you parked in the pay lot. I'm also co-chair of the Environmental Committee, and so we are bringing in speakers, and we do a lot of work, and I'll talk a little bit about that. To get to the speaker, just want to mention a little bit about what we do here on campus, and so start kind of with the good news. And the good news is we have a ton of very active folks here on campus, and so facilities management is one of the folks that's really at the forefront of doing a lot of work here on campus, and we have some distinguished guests with us. We have Ron Fields, who is former director, I believe, of facilities management, and then current director, Paul Corcoran, and then also we have in the office here, or in the audience here, we have, and this is where my brain gives up, Dave Cowan. And so, so we have some distinguished guests here with us, and also who basically oversees the Environmental Committee in the Finance Office, Rick Straka. And so we've got a lot of great folks doing some good work. We have what is called the Public Buildings Enhanced Energy Efficiency Program that has been put into place. I'll show you some of the reductions in greenhouse gases from that. The Guaranteed Energy Savings Program. And then also, we just recently installed 4 electric charging stations, so 4 access points, 2 charging stations with 4 access points. The MSSA, so our Student Senate, has been incredibly active in helping us out here in this process. So green transportation fee, they voted for, and this has basically doubled bus ridership in those routes right here around campus. And so that's been incredibly helpful. Car share program, I was just talking to the folks about the car share program today. That is something where if you're a student on campus, don't have access to your own vehicle, you sign up for this app, you go right to the car, and if it's available, you can use that car to get some groceries, do some running, that sort of thing. So we have that the Student Senate has helped out with. Residential Life, I don't know how many of you visited the new dining center, but that has a composting program in it, and so really cutting edge, and so those folks over there in Residential Life have helped out in improving our efficiency there. A tremendous amount of reduction in waste. And then the Environmental Committee. The Environmental Committee, I'll talk a little bit more about that. We have engaged in what is called a climate action plan. And so we brought some folks to campus, some consultants, and we kind of sat around and thought, what are some of the things that we can do on campus to help improve our sustainability here on campus? And so we manage and monitor, and then also try to initiate programs that help with sustainability. So some of the things that have happened is a bicycle-friendly initiative here on campus that was brought to us by a community member, but then supported by student senators, supported by folks on the Environmental Committee. And so we recently got a bronze certification for a bicycle-friendly campus. We had some students come to us, and they want to make this a bee-friendly campus, improve the pollinators on campus. Don't be afraid, we're not going to be importing big beehives anytime soon, but basically work with the vegetation that we have on campus already and make that more bee-friendly and fit with some of the things that we're already trying to accomplish. This is our carbon footprint from the Public Buildings Enhanced Energy Efficiency Program. And so you can see here the reductions in carbon dioxide emissions. We will be getting a bit more boost from our Guaranteed Energy Savings Plan, and so that data should be coming out here relatively soon in terms of how much we've saved from that program. So if you've walked through some of the buildings we've put in, and one of the major changes was LED lights instead of the fluorescent lights. And so that saves a tremendous amount in energy, but also in terms of disposal. We are going through quite a few, and you can talk to folks on campus about how many fluorescent light bulbs that we then have to take care of. And that's a waste that isn't necessarily you can just throw it in your garbage. We have to take care of that in a special kind of way. So that carbon update, we're improving on our carbon emissions, Guaranteed Energy Savings Program. So this is a picture of the library, basically showing how those lights have been implemented across campus. I talked a little bit about that green transportation fee, that electrical vehicle charging stations. So we have these things on campus that folks have helped to improve. And so the environmental committee consists of these folks, and it changes over time. But basically, we're here to take in ideas. If we have folks, one of the things that's happening is because of that dining center that we have on campus and the composting going on there, I have had a number of people contact me about improving and expanding that composting on campus. So students have come to me, students on the environmental committee, but students off the environmental committee. Faculty have approached me, staff. So we basically get together and we create a subcommittee and say, okay, you folks are the composting subcommittee. So a lot of discussion and talk has happened already about, well, let's see what we can do in the student union about, how can we maybe start composting here? And where might it start? And so the environmental committee is that place where these ideas kind of come together, we support, and then through things like this, we try to promote what our campus is doing in terms of green initiatives and what we're trying to accomplish. So there's a lot of good folks, and one of the things that as co-chair I've noticed is that there's just a tremendous amount of work that's being done that I don't even really have time as co-chair of the committee to keep track of. And so I hear day to day, all the great work that's happening in those different offices, in those different facilities. And so I'm really proud of the folks and the work that's being done. I wish we could get more information out from day to day about this. And so I just wanted to, and I don't have time to list all of the folks that are doing such great work, but we mentioned Residential Life, that new dining center. They're looking at things to improve their own sustainability in residential life. So those are the dorms, the dining center, that sort of thing. Facilities management, just constantly on the day-to-day, improving our efficiency by doing things just slightly differently, improving and looking at how we use energy on campus, and something that just isn't really talked about in the broader picture, but something that's happening constantly. And then we also have supporters. One of the things is that we are a volunteer committee. We don't have any, basically, people that are appointed full-time to do this work. We also didn't have a budget for the most part. And so the money that we got to do any kind of initiatives on campus came from donations. And so Barnes & Noble has been a long-time supporter of the committee. LJP is now investing in the committee also. And then we have a donor in the audience here who has set up a foundation for the committee. And so now we have some resources and we have the ability to maybe, think a little bit differently about how we do our work and maybe trying to spread this a little bit. And so there's a lot of folks that we'd like to thank for this committee. So one of the things is I talked about some of the improvements that we made. So what are we doing on campus? All of those savings, what's kind of our impact on what's going on around the world? And so this chart, the thing's a little small, but basically way over there to your right is all the global greenhouse emissions, basically metric tons. The one in the middle is how much our emissions are. So infinitesimal compared to what the emissions are globally. And then the one closest here on your left is those emissions that we've kind of saved in 2015. And so you can see that what we're doing on campus compared to what's happening globally is minuscule. Right? So our impact, even though we're doing all of this incredibly great work and we're doing all of this stuff to reduce our greenhouse emissions, compared to what's happening globally, we're really not even making a dent. So then the question is, well, why? Why would we want to do anything? If really locally here we're not really affecting some of these things like climate change and some of the impacts that we've seen even this year in terms of climate. And so the first answer is TINA. Basically, there is no alternative. And so if we want a future that is not demonstrably worse than it is right now, then we have to do something about this. We have to start making progress and inroads on addressing some of these changes and some of the problems that we're facing. The second thing is that we really got to start thinking as an institution, kind of bigger picture. We talk about big ideas, real-world thinking, we got to get past sort of this techno-fix, green kind of notions. One thing that we really have to understand in the long run is that there is no such thing as green capitalism. There is no such thing as sustainable business. We have to get past those kinds of ideas. Now, it's not to say that there isn't greener capitalism or more sustainable business, but we have to start thinking about that long-term kind of vision. And so there may be some things that we're doing that participate in that system that will then lead us to other areas. And so we always have to kind of keep our eye, and I put this picture up here, on the horizon. We have to look at that big picture. If we just do things incrementally, if we're the only institution in Minnesota that makes any change, it's not going to fix this problem. If colleges and universities are the only ones that make this change, we're not going to see improvement globally. And so we have to really start thinking differently about what this particular issue is and how we go about addressing it. And so we have to start modeling behavior. We have to start for our students, for our community. We have to be that institution that shows people this is how you can do it. And it's easy to do it. And it works right in with your lifestyle. It works right in with, how you live your daily life. And so part of it is about transition. We have to go from where we are now to somewhere very different, that horizon point, that point that's way off into the future. And sometimes that horizon moves on us, right? It keeps moving off into the distance. And so what we have to do is figure out, well, how do we get to that point? How do we move from a greener capitalism, a sustainable and more sustainable business, right? And move from that to something that then can address the issues that we face. And if we can't get past that, then we're not going to get past the problems that we see in our society. So part of what we're trying to do is bring Mr. Jacquard here to kind of talk about how do we move to that next step? How do we kind of start moving toward that horizon? How do we as an institution use the innovation that we have and the minds that we have and kind of get past the way in which, these kind of constraints that we built for ourselves, get past those and start looking at that future. And so I would like to, at this moment, welcome Mr. Jacquard to the stage to kind of give us a sense of what can we do, how can we move into the future. Okay? All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate seeing the audience here, and it's a great honor for me to be back here. I'm an alum, graduated here in 1988. I'm sort of old, but not really old, but I feel kind of old. Although it was funny, as I was driving down from Minneapolis on 169, I realized that, there's that building that has the 3 motorcycles on it and the big green stripe along it, and I'm like, same as it was when I used to drive here all the time. So it's fun to see sort of some of those similarities. It's great to be back here. Hopefully tonight I'm going to be able to walk you through some ideas of things that are going on in the field, some things that I've been able to do personally, that my institution has been able to do, and hopefully some lessons learned that we can share with you that you can be able to put into place here. My hope, as I've been talking with people here over the last day and a half, is that we can share the fact that the world of sustainability is about being educational, it's about being aspirational, and being inspirational. And if we can keep those 3 things in mind as we're going through this presentation, I think that's going to sort of help frame the conversation. Years ago, when we first started talking about environmental issues, one on a larger scale, think 1960s, people talked about the poor polar bear. The polar bear is out there, he's on the tundra, he's at the forefront of where climate change is going to be happening. We weren't calling it climate change at the time, but we were worried that things were getting worse off for the polar bear. And some people looked at that and they, did the snuggly moment that my niece just did of oh, the polar bears, we loved them. But a lot of people, that just didn't resonate. it kind of fell flat, that we failed to motivate people to do anything as a result of the plight of the poor polar bear. And so this is something that plagues me in terms of how do we, as a change agent, get the point across to people. And one of the things that I think that we need to talk about is not so much about the cuddly polar bear someplace, but it's something more tangible. This is my son, Alex, when he was 2 years old. Obviously the birthday with a full cupcake sort of smile. But this is the reason that motivates me. The changes that are going on in our society that are our responsibility, that are caused by us, are impacting us right now, but it's going to be impacting him in his life. It's going to be impacting his children in a grotesque way. You know, when you look at climate projections of, oh, what's the climate going to be like in 2100? Well, that's really not that far away, and nobody's talking beyond 2100 right now. And if you look at the projections of how bad things are now or are likely to be by 2100, what's it going to be like if we get this wrong now at that point? And this is one of the things that motivates me, because if we get this wrong, Earth, in all of its beauty and wonder, as Neil deGrasse Tyson will tell you, will shake us off like a flea because it doesn't care about us. The world, our Earth, has gone through 5 other mass extinctions of the inhabitants of it. How many dinosaurs do you see walking around currently, outside of the alligator? Not many, right? And we are in the 6th mass extinction, and we're the cause of it. And if you haven't heard that, if that's news to you today, I'm sorry for depressing you, and I will do more of that. But hopefully we're going to end with an optimistic tone by the end of this. If we get this wrong, they win. The cockroaches. I first encountered cockroaches when I came to college and lived in a really old residence hall off campus that used to be at the lower campus. They will survive anything, and they will live beyond us, and I don't want that to happen. It's not that I personally don't like them. Well, I do. I hate them. They're gross. Some things that I want to sort of start out with in terms of just basic sort of ground rules for us. There's some smart people who are out there who have looked at climate science, and they've written about this topic. And they've written a book. Actually, they've written 4 versions of the same book, and it's the National Climate Assessment. So there's some things that we need to start from in the beginning. Climate change is real. There are some people who politically want to debate this and say that it's a hoax and China created that. Perhaps this is a familiar line you've heard from others. That is not accurate. The scientists have spoken and they have told us it is real. They've also told us it's us. This is not the natural biorhythms of the planet, that it warms and it cools and it's a natural cycle, and that's not true. It's us. We're the ones who have done it. We've burned fossil fuels. That's how it happened. And about, after we killed off the whales and burned their oil, which didn't seem to have a whole lot of a negative effect, we discovered petroleum. And we found oil, and we started burning it by the metric shit ton. That's a technical term. And I'll show graphs about this in a minute, but it's oil and gas and the burning of those fossil fuels that has gotten us into this pickle. We went through the Industrial Revolution, everybody wanted to have a car, everybody wants a washing machine, everybody wants to use these commodities, and that's what's changed things. Cow farts is also another problem for us. So again, we just need to sort of own that fact that it's an issue. So for all of you who choose to eat meat, and I realize that I've come back to the Midwest from the East Coast, and you may think that I'm some sort of weird liberal who may be a vegan, perhaps, and that's not accurate, but cows and the amount of methane that they produce is significant. There is an impact when you eat red meat. To produce 1 pound of red meat from a cow, it requires, let's say, 600 gallons of water to raise that pound, whereas an eggplant is about 36 gallons of water. There's a huge impact difference in terms of our protein sources. I'm not sure how much protein is in an eggplant, so somebody can Google that and we can talk about that during the question and answer session. Last thing they wanted to leave us with is that this is serious. If we don't do something about this, it's catastrophe level. The time to act is still here to avoid some of those significant consequences, but that time is closing rapidly. So, specifically, if you go into this lovely climate assessment, it gives you that breakdown by region. So for me, in the Northeast, it's going to get hotter, it's going to be rainier, we're going to get more intense storms in shorter amounts of time. So the state of Maine, as a great example, has 900 culverts that are all 18-inch culverts that are underneath their roadways. They're all going to wash away in the next 30 years. Think about that number, 900,000. That if the state has sort of a plan of, well, we're going to replace 1,000 of those a year, times 900 divided by, well, it's, again, they're never going to get to it. Nature is just going to take care of that for them. And the roads will become impassable, and you won't be able to move around at all. And how much life, liberty, and the lack of the pursuit of happiness can you do in the northern woods of Maine if you can't drive there? So at some point, the climate is going to be taking care of some of those things for us. So we looked at it for the Midwest here. So here locally, I'll let you read that slide. Basically, what it is telling us is that although things are going to become wetter here, those wet times are going to be infrequent. And so we're going to get a lot of rain. Think like Houston during the recent hurricane. We're going to get, trillions of gallons of water that are going to descend on us in a very short amount of time and then go away for a long period of time. So we'll have flood followed by drought. And that in that cycle, for those of you who are involved in, agriculture here in the region, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. How do you grow things when all your seeds have washed away and then there's no water left? So we have an obligation to learn this information and to share that information with all of the people within our region. And so as Paul is talking about, we have the obligation to transfer that knowledge and to share that information with all of our friends and neighbors in the area. Although the growing season is going to be a little bit longer, in general, the water changes are more significantly going to be changing that. Again, as this region becomes hotter, eventually, if you sort of go far enough in advance, think like 2070, 2080, it's going to be difficult to grow things in this climate because the climate is going to be shifting northward. So if you want to be a farmer, you start buying land in Canada now. But you can't go too far north because the tundra doesn't support the growth of certain agricultural products. So when is it that you are better off investing in, say, a greenhouse operation that you can control the environment a little bit better, or, as we've done on our campus in a very small scale, buy yourself a shipping container and then make it into a big grow house. It's not just because we've legalized pot that we're doing that, we're growing other leafy vegetables on our campus. So here's some fun facts for us. Population growth. If you go back in time, we were relatively stable for a really, really long time where there were some people on Earth. I came in, and I don't think the pointer has a little graphic thing, but I came in right around the 3.5 million mark in 1965. And in my lifetime, again, I think this went through 1998, so we're about just over 7 billion people on the planet right now. So in my lifetime, it has doubled. I'm hoping to last another 30, 35 years. It's likely to double again in my lifetime. So let's fast forward this to your lifetimes. If you're a student here, if the population of this Earth is going to increase 4 times in your lifetimes, what is the carrying capacity of our planet and its ability to feed you fresh water and food? And what are you going to do with all that sewage? It becomes a bit dismal. I promised I was going to depress you, correct? Okay. So if you look at that temperature change that has also gone on historically, that's the big bumpy graph that goes across the back. Again, temperatures fluctuate. Sometimes it's warmer, sometimes it's colder. That's weather. The pattern of the entire thing is climate. And our climate has been getting warmer and warmer and warmer. Again, we're going back to 1000 on this graph, running us only up through the year 2000. But you can see there's this meteoric hockey stick of a channel at the end where you can see the temperature change has gone up as well. This is the global CO2 levels. So again, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. It's amongst 3 greenhouse gases that significantly are the ones that are holding on to heat within the atmosphere. Because we have more and more and more of it. Remember we talked about shit ton of metric tons of CO2 that's getting emitted? That's where they're all coming in. So if you look back historically in the Earth's record, the level of CO2 in the atmosphere has never been above 350 parts per million. There's an organization called 350.org, led by Bill McKibbins, and he's out there trying to get us to return to that, to commit to keeping the planet at 350 parts per million. This last summer, that went over 400 and has stayed there. So all of the future weather that we are going to be experiencing, our future climate that we're going to be living in, is at a historically high level. All of our predictive models of past behaviors can really just get thrown out the window. So when we talk about the amount of rainfall that we are likely to get, how do we base that on our flood insurance? We look at a 100-year storm or a 500-year storm. That, these are our typical averages. This is what we based our assumptions on. We've built campus around the idea that, how much water can we handle in a 100-year storm? So what happens when the 100-year storm, like in Houston, comes in last year, this year, and 2 years before that, and oh, by the way, we had a 500-year flood thrown in the middle of that as well. That our predictive models don't work anymore because we're in this weird state where the things are so bad. Here's just a fun little graph of the billion-dollar extreme weather events that have happened and the disasters over the last 20 or so, 30 or so years. Again, notice the similar pattern of the graphs. Again, it's kind of been trucking along, and then all of a sudden it seems to be going up. More CO2, more temperature, more damages. If you like to see this in bubble form, here's an example of all of the different billion-dollar accidents and climate-related challenges that we've had, from floods to droughts to fires to, did I mention triple hurricanes? Yeah. So if you haven't seen the photos of just how much water Hurricane Harvey dumped on Houston, that's worth Googling at some point if you've got some time. So when carbon goes up into the atmosphere, where does it go? What does it do? So some of it certainly stays in the atmosphere, and that's where we have this problem with global warming. Some of it goes into plants and into the land itself, and that's great. So all those trees that are out there soaking up CO2, they're making oxygen for us. We appreciate that. Without it, it would be a problem. I am mindful of, when I was a small child and was bored one day while it was raining outside, I grabbed a book and was speaking in lots of breathy tones to one of our houseplants to try to encourage it to grow more. Our CO2 feeds the plants and they give us oxygen back, and that's a really helpful cycle. Unfortunately, 28% of that CO2 is going into our oceans. How many people here are familiar with the term ocean acidification? Many of you, and I'm really happy to see that. I'm sad that it exists. But again, the whole idea is that when you put carbon into the oceans, it changes the acidity of that. I am not a chemistry person, but what I do know is that when you change the pH level of water, it becomes more acidic, and in doing so, changes the ability of carbon-based life forms to be able to form hard shells. So coral reefs and lobsters and crabs have a difficult time forming a hard enough shell to survive the other attacking things in the world. I don't know about you, but I actually enjoy eating a lobster occasionally, crabs as well. I enjoy the idea that the Great Barrier Reef exists and is still going to be alive indefinitely, but the world of coral bleaching is showing us that they are dying at a rapid rate because we've made the oceans more acidic. So here's a lovely place in the ocean. It's called the Maldives. It's in the Indian Ocean just off of India. Beautiful place, 1,000 islands that look somewhat similar to this. It's a vacationer's paradise. If you want to, you can stop by there, fly in. The average height above sea level is about 8 feet. So as you're thinking of hearing people talk about sea level rise. Again, you're very safe in a landlocked location here in that the oceans, at least in its current form, are not, risking washing over the continent in the near future. But here they don't have that luxury. When a high tide comes through, bad things end up happening to the landforms as well as the people that are inhabiting that. I mentioned there's 1,000 islands as a part of this chain. They have one garbage dump that they've just chosen to say, that's the island, we'll take all of the garbage from all of those people who live here and all the kind visitors who have come here. And when there's a high tide, that garbage dump leaks into the ocean. So what happens in the next 25 years when the level of the entire oceans as it gets warmer will expand and increase as we shrink some of our glaciers and add more of that water into the overall oceans and level rises, the Maldives will go away and we get to inherit all of their garbage. There are several island nations right now who are buying up land inside of other landlocked countries so that their people can have a place to go live when their islands disappear. That is happening today. So, Marshfield, Massachusetts, a little closer to home for me. This is actually about 30 miles from where I live. Regular coastal storm, it's a nor'easter, blows in, there's a high tide, so it happens to be that these waves come up in extra a little bit. That's actually houses along the beach in Marshfield. It was a marsh and a field, and somebody said, let's build houses right along the ocean. That seems like a good idea, right? Not so much. The waves are actually covering the second story of that house. You'll notice the house next to it actually doesn't have a basement. They have what is essentially a stone staircase going up so that people can live in the upstairs and just let the ocean continue to go through. In much like Venice, in about 20 years, they'll be attending to that house by boat, not by car. As you see, that car tried and did not make it. And this is regular coastal flooding. I actually had a chance to be at a seminar for some people from the planning agency that runs Martha's Vineyard. And the regional planning agency showed similar slides to this when they talked about, what's your resiliency plan? How are you going to deal with climate change? They said, we just put our boots on. Good plan. So if you are at all familiar with the Red River, it occasionally floods. Generally, we build bridges over our rivers, not through the middle of them. But sometimes nature takes over, right? We've seen this with our own river right here. We've built dams and dikes, and I'm sure some of you are old enough to remember stories and experiences when that river has come up over its banks. And when we have a 500-year flood, I'm guessing it's going to do it again. When we have the 1,000-year flood, it most definitely is going to do that. And that was one of the sad things that I was coming back with new eyes to look at this town with, realizing that just there's all of these floodplains that exist historically that are going to be floodplains again. And in some ways that's healthy. It actually helps to renew the earth, and that's awesome and wonderful. It's not so great when you have hard gravel and hard infrastructure that's been built, because that's all going to be destroyed. So speaking of destroying, my hometown, Duluth, experienced a 500-year flood not that many years ago, 4 years, I think it was. That's a Toyota in the bottom of what was a road. It is significant. It is going to be catastrophic, and it certainly is awful for the person who owned that car. Again, we've never been at a time in our planet when the CO2 levels have been above 350. That's the backdrop for me that I wanted you to understand before we kind of go into what is the rationale to why I've tried to make changes in my life, why I do the work that I do with the university, and the reason I'm here is to share some tips on things that I think that you guys can be doing here. So that kind of lays out the groundwork here. So some things that I've done in my own life. In Massachusetts, we have home energy assessments that are actually provided at no cost because we pay into a small fee to the utilities. So I had some people come out as smart people who walked around and said, oh, well, maybe if you did this or you did that, you could improve some things. And it would cost you less to run your house and make it more efficient so that you're not leaking this energy out of it. So we insulated. We insulated the entire house. We actually were really fortunate that we had a state grant available to do that, and they paid 75% of the insulation costs. So that's going to pay us back as a family in about 2.5 years. It also gives us a much more comfortable house. My daughter actually living upstairs in her room is no longer freezing cold because the wind is no longer blowing through her closet, and she doesn't have to wear 3 sweaters when she's holed up there as a 15-year-old ignoring the rest of us. So we installed ductless mini-splits for heating, cooling, and dehumidification. We have a perfectly good boiler that runs the heat in our house. Our air conditioning died, and rather than put in a conventional air conditioning system, we went with this ductless mini-splits, run by electricity, super efficient, and runs all the time, sort of in the background. It actually has an economy setting, so when it doesn't detect motion in an area, it allows the temperature to adjust a little bit so that it's not overheating or overcooling a space. And it's all run by electricity. We bought an electric vehicle. Was fortunate enough to realize that we had a Prius plug-in previously, and we're all excited that 12 of my miles in my 2-mile commute back and forth to work were going to be done on electricity, and I was going to be magical because then I could just drive all of the time. And what I found was that 17% of my miles were spent on electricity. And that was really depressing, because what I realized is that when I drove from, say, my town, like, to Minneapolis, it's an hour away, I was driving up to Boston, that in doing that trip, the first 10, 12 miles were on electricity, but the rest of the miles up and all of the miles back were not. Those were on gas. Now, it was a Prius, and it was extremely easy on gas, but still, the underlying principle is that we were using fossil fuels to do that. So the only way to make a change is to go entirely to an electric vehicle and to do that. To be able to offset that even further, we've gone forward and put solar panels on the house. So literally, when we drive now, it is entirely off of solar power. And that's technology today. This is not some magical thing in the future. This exists right now. I use reusable water bottles, and I need some right now. If you at all have looked around campus, you've got refillable bottle stations that are around. I quantify the use on my campus. We've got 25 of those filling stations. They've been used 1.3 million times since the time that we installed them. That's about a $2 million impact on our community members. So our students, faculty, and staff have not had to waste $2 million of their dollars sending it off to northern Maine, where we've stolen their water, stuffed it into plastic bottles that come back to us that we generally only recycle at about a 20% recycling rate societally, and that's not good. The other thing is that the water you're paying for is 2,000 times more expensive than what you get from the bottle filling station. So if there's one economic lesson you'll take away from tonight's lecture, is that stop spending 2,000 times more than you need to for something that's essentially cheap, free, cold, and available everywhere on campus. So reducing, reusing, and recycling. I am that crazy person in the family who is, going back into the trash and saying, okay, who put the water bottle, who bought the water bottle in the first place, and, why didn't you put it in the correct place? We've converted to all LED lighting within our house, so we can dim everything. We just had a renovation project, so we put dimmers so that not only do we have to not run them at 100%, but when we are running them, they're really efficient. And we compost our food waste, and I put an asterisk, sometimes. We were doing a really great job with this, and then it kind of fell off, and it was awful and horrible, and it smelled, and the dog was getting in it and dragging banana peels all over the whole backyard, and so we did away with it for a while. But again, part of our piloting is figuring out what works and what doesn't. And when it doesn't work, how do you go back to the sort of drawing board and say, okay, well, that iteration didn't work, but how can we de-risk this a little bit more and make it easier for us to do the right thing? So, where I work is at UMass Dartmouth. We're a campus of about 8,000 students. We're located just south of Boston. We are on a 710-acre plot of land, which is an amazing resource. 350 of those acres we have developed and use. About 200 of those acres are actually in grassland that we mow. That's a lot of grass. So one of my initiatives is to do a low mowing project where we can mow 20% less of that grass and return the rest to support pollinators as we're trying to do that. So we in 2007 signed on to the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, a horribly long acronym that they've since shortened to the Climate Commitment. So basically we are part of 679 other schools who have said we will commit to reducing our carbon footprint by 80% by the year 2050. Some in the university have said, wow, that's really aspirational. It's inspirational that you've tried to get us to go that direction, but educationally, how the heck are we going to do this? We don't know. So we talk about magic all of the time, about the fact that at some point we're waiting for nuclear fusion to happen more quickly than it is sort of being purported to. But we're doing the hard work of trying to ask those questions of where is it that we can save and how is it that we can save, and we need to do an all of the above sort of solution in trying to get there. So in order to do that, we contacted a performance engineer. In our case, a company called Noresco. You're using a company called Amoresco. Similar sort of work in terms of really smart engineers come in with pencils and they count every light fixture and look at all the different opportunities to exist. And as a result of that, we went forward with a $35 million energy savings contract, split into two phases. One of those was 19 different initiatives. And when I say initiatives, one initiative was strictly relating to water, and then there were like 16 subparts to that. We did LED lighting. We didn't actually do LED. We did compact fluorescent at the time because the price point wasn't quite there. Lessons learned. Sometimes in the middle of a contract, you need to go back and renegotiate the contract because technology and prices have changed. And had we had the opportunity to do that again, we would have been more mindful of that because we missed out on the LED thing. So instead of we got 8-year lamps rather than 14-year lamps. So it makes a big difference in some of those details. We built a wind turbine, a 600 kilowatt unit. Actually, we got it for free. That was an awesome state subsidy. Unfortunately, it doesn't work really great. So again, being an early adopter sometimes is not an awesome thing. It turned out to be an Indian company from India that subcontracted most of the work globally. So when the O-ring that stops the oil from bursting out of the hub of this went, and we sprayed mineral oil all over an entire field. It took us 9 months to find the Italian maker of that, to get them to make another one because they didn't have it on the shelf. They had to actually custom make it, and they had to find the plans, and then they had to find some dude who had retired to come back to run the machine. It's complicated. And so this isn't always easy work to do, but boy, it's spinning right now, and it's amazing. It's actually produced about 5 megawatts of power in its lifetime for us. We put in about 369 kilowatts of solar panels. We put them on top of 5 buildings. Solar panels take up a lot of real estate. We've done it on top of flat roofs, so we're sort of fortunate. We actually were designed as a mostly flat roof campus, so we have the ability to do that. Solar carports is another thing that we're looking at doing, and I would highly suggest you guys look at as well. You've got space, and you guys are already on to looking at that. So some other things that we've done. We're creating an energy master plan for ourselves as well as a sustainability master plan to specifically look at how are we going to get there. We have aspirational goals that are huge, and we are slightly clueless on how we're going to get there. So we're employing smart people and consultants and working together with the 5 colleges in the UMass system to share information with one another so that we can look at those best practices and we can better target how things are going. We also have a state who is giving us some pretty specific guidelines of where they expect us to be. That also requires that we expect of them that they release the funding to be able to help us to do those things, and they have been unwilling thus far to do that. They've also been unwilling to change certain rules and regulations that say you can't build a building unless it is net zero, so we keep building buildings that aren't because we're not being forced to. So that's one more advocacy area that we need to step in to be able to change some of those things. We've launched a green office program where we've actually gone in and talked to people in different offices and helped to evaluate, what kind of cleaning supplies they're using, what kind of office supplies are they using, have they looked at some of the green alternatives that exist out there for them to use, and trying to encourage people to switch over to 100% tree-free paper. Yes, I said it, it's tree-free paper. You can make it out of, in this case, sugarcane stalks. It doesn't taste sweet. I've tried it. It's not so good. But that's, it's out there. It exists. There's also stuff being made from the stalks of wheat. Again, sugarcane is like this big. Wheat is much thinner, so it takes a lot more of it to do that. So we've implemented a multifunction device program, so rather than you having a laser printer in your office and you have an inkjet and you have an inkjet and you have an inkjet and Oprah's not shown up, but we've talked about consolidating those resources, so at the end of the hallway exists the multifunction device that does printing and color and scanning and faxing, and who faxes anymore anyway? That's one of those dying things that we need to just sort of stop paying $35 per line to have a fax line and have one e-fax that goes to the university. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. We run a green move-out program where we actually collect from students who are leaving the university stuff they don't want anymore. So whether it's the plastic shower caddies or chemicals that they used to use for cleaning, it's a half a bottle of bleach, we'll take it. And what we do is we donate most of those out to different aid organizations within the community. We send all of the bedding that we take in from students off to a group that helps women who are fleeing from domestic violence situations and that need to get set up in a new apartment and get bedding. So they give them the beds, we provide the bedding for that. The clothing goes to a different group, food goes to food pantries, but all the other plastic stuff and random cube refrigerators and fans, we hold on to. We stick it in a shipping container, and then in the fall we have a new to you yard sale. Everything is 80% off. This model was created by a group called the Post-Landfill Action Network out of UNH in New Hampshire, and they give you what the price list is. Super easy to work with. Our students love it. They move in, and rather than having to immediately run to Target to buy that last-minute waste basket that they thought their new bonehead roommate didn't bring with them, we can just buy them from us for, $1. And so they get a deal. We save this stuff from going in the landfill, and it's a really win-win program for everybody. So we are creating an app to track showers. And again, the idea is that if we have to pay to buy the water, pay to heat it up, and pay to throw it away at the end, showers are expensive. Especially on our campus, we've got 3,800 warm bodies who are doing that 7.8 times a day. They do that for an average of 12 minutes at a time. So if I can get them, I've been studying this for like 4 years, and if we can get everybody to shorten their shower down to the length of about two songs, that we'll be able to shrink our water impact by the equivalent of 3 swimming pools at our university. I use swimming pools because when you start talking about large volumes of water, it's easy to lose people. If I told you 387 hectares of water, is that meaningful? 3 swimming pools? Much more so. So again, trying to get our students to be able to do that. 40% of my students use 60% of our water because they basically get in, like most of you as teenagers at home may have experienced, I own the water, I get to use as much of it as I want to, and you can't tell me what I have to get out because there's literally nobody telling them to get out of the shower. So we're trying to get them to change their behaviors, use an app to help time them. We actually get to track all of that and be able to know and be able to study. Do our women use more than our men? Do this residence hall do more than that? Do majors differ? So we actually are turning this into a whole study project for ourselves. So as a system, the UMass system represents 5 different colleges, sort of similar to the state college system that you have here with 7. So we've done work where we've banded together and created a sustainability council. So all of us are actively working together on a monthly basis to look at sort of what are our issues and challenges. How do we share stories and wins with one another? And so we're meeting with that group on a monthly basis. It used to be quarterly, and then it turned into an every other month, and now we've got a monthly opportunity. We actually took that group and were able to lobby the president's office to be able to give us some money to give out as grants. So we've got a $25,000 grant that we're able to give out this year. We're actually putting in an EV charging station at the president's office so that when each of the campuses buy an electric vehicle, they can drive it to the central office, get charged up, and be able to return home, and we can stop having all of those trips being done with gas from 5 different campuses. So we also created a sustainability policy, again, on 10 different indices, from our food use to composting to our energy use to water. We're mapping out the 10 different areas and uniformly reporting on those to the Board of Trustees. Again, lots of political people who like to sit around and say, are you good stewards of our funds? Are you looking after the Commonwealth's best interest in the students that we represent? And it's an interesting experience to stand there with a bunch of people in suits who say, what did you do this year? And now we can answer that with a definitive amount of numbers to back that up. Our next move to do with that group is to be able to actually institute a floor for expectations of, now here's a minimum standard to which all 5 campuses are going to be speaking with. And we're going to be ratcheting that up as time goes on. So that's a little bit about the report and that. So what is sustainability? Again, I'm not going to assume that people here necessarily understand that, so forgive me if I'm going to bore you for just a moment. The world of sustainability is about the environment. You have an environmental affairs committee. You're concerned with the environment. That's where this movement first grew out of. But we realize is that that larger sort of work is also impacted by our society. If we happen to live in a society where because you look different than I do, or you dress different than I do, or you speak a different language than I do, I'm going to create divides and divisions between us, that we're not going to get along on planet Earth very well. Actually had an opportunity 2 weeks ago. One of our alums is up in space right now in the International Space Station. We did an uplink with him and got to talk with him for about 30 minutes. I got to ask a question that was approved locally as well as by NASA. That was sort of intimidating. Here's your question. Read it as it was. Okay, great. And it sounds exactly like it has on all those recordings. Attention, Houston. Houston calling Dartmouth. You're ready for uplink. And you're like, oh my God. You're in like one of those movies. But I got to ask what his perspective is. He's one of 347 people who have actually been in space. That's not a big group. And I wanted to know what his perspective is. Has it changed in terms of his view of the environment or spirituality or how he looks at the Earth from that vantage point? I actually cheated. I used Michael Collins' statement from the original first moonshot that went out, where he said that, when you look back and look at this blue marble hanging in the sky, everything changes. It's one world. So Scott Tingle, the astronaut that I spoke with, said, at that moment he looked out the portal and he said, we're flying over the Cape of Horn. It's the southern tier of the continent of Africa. From here, there are no lines. There are no languages. There are no differences. We're all together hanging in space on this one little blue planet, and we're all interconnected. The International Space Station is a project of 44 countries. He had to train in 4 of those different countries to become fluent in 5 languages. The entire space station is written in Russian. And he said once you got there, you had to trust that this other person who on Earth is sort of your nemesis, an enemy, to say, I think this says bathroom, but does it? You have to trust, and you learn that we're all similar, we're all connected. So society is an important part of this whole equation. The economy is another backdrop to this as well. Some people choose to focus on the fact that, if 99% of us are all sort of living day to day, getting by, just barely working as hard as we can to just sort of keep food on the table, not always able to do that, and there's 1% of our society who's living real large on the fact that everything is fine and they're living in their gated communities. How long before the French Revolution happens again and we just go back and return that capital to the masses? That's not a really great societal goal. So part of the work of sustainability is to help us create symbiotic balances between all of those pieces. We need Earth, we need water, we need air, we need our planet's climate system to not try to crush us. But we also need to be able to get along with one another, and we have to have an equitable system of our economy. So the world of sustainability really is a puzzle. I'm working on this piece about bees, and somebody else is working on this about bikes, and somebody else is trying to work on our composting program. And all of that comes together to form what is, a bigger puzzle. But sometimes it's not just 4 pieces, right? It's 973, or 1,000 if you haven't lost some of them. But who's looking at that bigger picture? Who has that 10,000-foot level who can say, okay, this group over here, it's important that you're doing what you're doing, and I love the connections, but you know what? The stuff that you're doing actually relates to the stuff that they're doing. So if we can pull you guys over here and put you guys together, we're actually going to complete a part of the puzzle and get that sort of end corner over here. You didn't know that they existed, but somebody does. That sustainability person provides that thread to be able to pull disparate corners together to provide those connections for people. I like to use a Tinkertoy analogy. For the last 20 years, I've actually been scouring yard sales to find a set of Tinkertoys because I'm cheap and I don't want to go buy my own for list price. I found them this summer. So my students came into my office and they're like, what have you done? And I've got this model. It looks somewhat similar to this, where I've just put all kinds of things together because this is an institution, and this is a student, and this is a program, and this is an opportunity, and there's a grant, and all of these things get shoved together, and it's messier than heck. But it illustrates the idea that a student is not a one thing, nor is a university a one thing, or sustainability is not a one thing. It's multifaceted. It has so many different endpoints. And if what we do with committees oftentimes is we do a lot of disconnected things when we end up with sort of this model in the middle where, it stands, it's actually kind of nice, but the bottom picture is a little bit more elegant. It's a little bit more well-refined. It helps us to bring order to some of those things and to make something bigger and more beautiful out of what it is that operates and functions on a much better scale. That's what the world of sustainability is about building those bridges and making those kinds of connections. So why did I get to come here today to talk? It's really to look at the Mavericks program. I will tell you that over my last 24 hours of being here, I've really been amazed and impressed at the volume of people who are doing amazing and great work. What I read in your climate action plan and in the updates from all of those things lies a little flat. because no one here knows what all those different other things are and the connections that are missing. And that was, I think, the first thing that stood out to me. We went on a campus tour today, and they're like, okay, well, do you want to go see this new building or that new building? And I'm like, I want to see the physical plant. I want to know where you make your heat. I want to know where the electricity comes in. I want to know what your backup systems are. And luckily, this group sort of tolerates that, and they're like, oh yeah, well, we've done that before. That's not a weird request. This is not the admissions tour. Generally, you don't go into the physical plant to look at your boilers, but we did today. And again, amazing work that is being done here already. So, in my opinion, Mankato needs a superhero. You need a champion. Somebody who has that ability to have that 60,000-foot level vision of what is happening. As I was chatting yesterday with President Davenport, one of the things that we talked about is the fact that there are so many good stories that are embedded within the institution, but no one's there to hear them and amplify them and draw that connecting point back to the fact that this is a sustainable story. This is about the fact that Mankato is a green campus. That is probably one of the greenest campuses when you look. But that's not our selling point. That's not the thing that we can point to a long list of things that says, these are all of the reasons that this is going on. Because it's buried in your annual report and in your sub-annual report to the qualifier, to the asterisk of the sub-report of somebody else's, that all of those stories have been buried out there. Again, talking with the director of the physical plant was an amazing story to see in the last 17 years that he's been here. Just the volume of work alone that man has done to be able to modernize the facilities, make sure that they're running efficiently, that they're using every single grant opportunity that exists to help use other people's money to make those improvements here. And the reality is, you guys are doing great. I mean, when the utility company comes in and tells you, yeah, there's not really any incentives we can give you this year because you kind of have done them all, that's a really great place to be. And that's something that you as students need to understand, and you need to know that as a prospective student, your institution values your dollars to the point that they are efficiently doing all that they can do to keep this a low-cost education, because they're operating super lean. That's an opportunity that's missed, and it's lost. And that, I think, is something that's key to the work that I do. I'm going to confuse you all with this next set of slides, and that's okay. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, don't feel badly. I've gone to 3 sessions to learn about this stuff, and it's only 4 slides, so there's my public disclaimer. Has anybody here heard about the adaptive operating system? Just me. Okay, great. The whole idea is that institutions generally organize themselves, as we see over on the left-hand side, or sorry, the right-hand side, left hand not there. It's an organization chart. There's one person at the top. It kind of goes down from there. There's vice presidents. There's directors of different departments. It's hierarchical. Hierarchies are very, very good at coming up with what are the rules. Let us implement those rules. Smart people are located at the top. They have bigger degrees. They get higher money, and they have more responsibility. And we generally roll edicts down from there in terms of this is how we think things should run. Go out there and do it. The adaptive operating system is living in the fact that that is great for running things as they are. Sometimes we run into problems where we don't know how to solve a problem. And I'll illustrate this more in a second. And we need other people to solve a problem. And so let's just jump to that for a second. Minneapolis International Airport, great solution for this. They were having a problem. Go figure, it's Minnesota. We had one year where, I think it was 4 years ago, banner snowstorms, just snow coming out of every location there possibly was. They didn't know what to do with it anymore. Their normal plowing techniques didn't work. Planes were being delayed, there were problems on the runway, they couldn't taxi properly, they couldn't get service vehicles in and out of them, they couldn't get emergency equipment where it needed to be. They were just losing their ability to function. And so the director of snow plowing got 3 angry phone calls and was told, come up with a new plan. And he didn't have another plan. He didn't know what else he could do because they'd perfected this. It worked. It had worked for 20 years. Why would we need to change? We can't change. There's nothing else that we could possibly do. So somebody had been exposed to this adaptive operating system, and they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to bring together some disparate people, rather than just the snow plowing team, we're going to bring food service operations, and we're going to get somebody from ground control, and we're going to get somebody from the carrier, and somebody from the emergency team, and we're going to put all of them together in a room. We're going to first of all look at the conference table and check underneath it and see if we've got different shoes represented. If there are work boots and high heels and flats and some sneakers, we've done the right job. We've got a different group of people here. If you look under the table and they're all wearing similar footwear, stop the meeting immediately and reformulate it. And so they looked at that shoe test, they said, we've got the right people in the room, and they workshopped this. They talked about it, and I think we should do this. Well, that's going to affect us in this way. Oh, I didn't know that. I never was allowed to know that. That was so far away from my part of the world, I didn't know that I was impacting you in that way. And by talking about it and testing something and coming up with a pilot project, we could look at that again and say, okay, well, these things worked, but these parts didn't. And generally, after about 2 or 3 pilot programs, you're able to come up with a successful solution, which was then handed back to the organization chart so that that director could go ahead and implement that and train people on that and write out standard operating procedures for that, and they were able to be successful in doing that. They never would have gotten there if they had stuck with that one team because they didn't understand the impact that it had on everybody else. This is the world of sustainability. We exist in the middle where the globe is. We know what the operating system, what the standard organization chart is of command and control. We also understand the ability to take something, road test it, pilot it, de-risk that for the institution, and take it and try and fail and fix. This is something I did at my own campus with our recycling program. I took the recycling program from our facilities operations people because they were blowing it. They were at a 6% recycling rate. And we built our wind turbine. We're out there saying, yay us, look at that, we've got a wind turbine, aren't we awesome? And one of our students wrote a comment to us and said, how can I take you seriously about sustainability if you don't recycle properly? And that hurt. And I retreated into the idea of, well, it's not my job, it's not my responsibility, I don't oversee that. Until I realized that I had to be involved in fixing it because it was directly impacting what I did and how I could move forward with the programs that I needed to do. And so I took our recycling program for a year, and I pilot projected some things, and I got different shoes under the table, and we talked about it, and we went to conferences and learned about best practices. And the more that we learned about it, the more we said, okay, let's try this, and then we got to do that, and then we had to change our garbage contract, and I had to re-bin the place, and I had to get 4 grants to do that. And 4 years later, finally was able to give it back to my colleague in the facilities operations team. And I'm not out of the water yet. I still have to do trainings with them, and I'm involved with doing waste audits, and we're trying to do educational things with it to help our community learn from our mistakes of what our audits are telling us. But what we learned from that is that it's possible to see this in action and to see that feedback loop taking place and to involve multiple people in coming up with a solution. And then when I gave it back to them, they said, okay, we trust you, we believe in you. And now they come to me to say, we're thinking of this other thing, and can you give us some insight because you were really helpful the last time around. And so we're able to build that camaraderie and to build that respect amongst others. And so now we're looking at food waste and trying to solve that problem. We don't have great solutions on that either. And again, that's going to be another 4-year project for us. So when I talk to people about our recycling rate, I took our recycling program from 6% and I brought it up to 26%. I also set a zero waste goal for us to get there by 2025. So I have an aspirational piece to that as well. The middle of the story, it's ugly. I tried one program, we hired people, I had students that were sorting things in the middle of wintertime, like here's dump a big thing out here, and garbage goes that way, and tin cans go that way, and redeemable cans go that way, because I want the 5-cent returnable thing to come back to me, and there's bottles and cans and plastic, and we had 8 different streams that are being sorted by work study students. And that was awesome and amazing until we had to renegotiate the garbage contract, and then a new hauler came in and said, we'll just undercut the price of single-stream recycling and we'll only charge you $35 a ton rather than $75 a ton for your garbage. And everybody else ran the numbers and said, that costs less. So we're going to go with that. So I had to come up with a new plan on how we're going to go from 3 bins down to 2 bins, and how we're going to re-educate everybody on that, and what kind of signage changes, and what kind of tops do I need to change. And I had blue and green recycle bins, and how am I going to accurately educate people about the fact that that is recycling, even though it's not the same color, but it's not the black, which is the garbage cans. And so the middle looked a lot like the squiggly line. The general story that I get to tell people is that I took over our recycling program, and in 4 years was able to bring it from a rate of 6% up to 26%. And we're really proud of that, and we're aspirating? That's not the right term. We are hoping to get to zero waste. Yes, thank you. We're hoping to get to zero waste by 2025. So again, using these kinds of diagrams helps people to understand that life is messy. This work is messy, but ultimately what comes out of it are very satisfying results. So the people who teach this are actually at Harvard. Leith Sharp is the person in charge of this. It's an open source project where they're actually working on getting people to be involved in this process to be able to learn more about it. They do a 3-day executive leadership seminar at Harvard through their extension school. Combines both education, governmental, nonprofit, corporate leaders from around the globe. For some reason, people like Harvard, and they think that going there makes them look smart, and they put that on their resumes, that I went to a Harvard thing. So Leith is using that platform to be able to get the cachet for the program. But one of the things that I love about it is that Leith also is an entrepreneur, and she's willing to come directly to a campus. So rather than saying, let's take the entire executive team to Cambridge for the next 4 days to just solely focus on learning this, why don't we bring Leith here for a day and a half and have you learn about it directly, so that not only the cabinet can learn about that, directors can learn about it, AVPs can learn about it, other significant people in the institution can learn about that, so that you too can build the capacity to have people understand that philosophy and be able to utilize that tool. She likes to say that sustainability is the solution to your process and also happens to solve your problems. So it's an amazing opportunity. The link is there. This whole show is in Paul's hands, so please reach out to him if there's additional things that you want from this. I see some people scribbling notes. I'm going to start going quicker as we keep talking because I'm going to be running out of time. So Common Ground is another program that exists in this world where they're actually having workshops to fix and improve the model. So I mentioned the word de-risking. That was one of the terms that came out of my seminar when I was with them, looking at sort of how to advance this model. And again, rather than saying, we're going to run a pilot program, pilot programs doesn't have the same cachet as, oh, I can de-risk that for you. Isn't de-risking better? Yeah, like I would love for there to be less risk in me taking over a program when it's done, right? So that's an amazing opportunity there. So again, just kind of going through some stuff Paul had talked about. MSU's overall greenhouse gas impact, originally from your baseline, was about 45,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. 63% of that relates to purchased electricity and energy. I stand corrected on that. Nope. Sorry. 63 is the purchased electricity as well as the transmission and demand losses that go with that. 27% is natural gas and fuel oil. Quick math majors out there, what is that total? Another metric shit ton. That is the majority, like 90% of what you do here comes from those two areas. Most of the people in this room have no province over those decisions. You just show up, pay your tuition, and use some things. Now, as students and as members of the community, we do have the ability to say, do I want to take the elevator today, or do I want to take the stairs? And if we can educate everybody around some of those kinds of issues, when I leave my residence hall, do I leave every single thing on that I conceivably can? Because who cares? I'm not paying the bill. Actually, you are, and it makes a difference. So if we can change your behaviors, maybe we'll be able to squeeze maybe 10 or 15% out of those numbers. But it's 10 or 15%, and that's an important aspect when it comes to trying to cut significant volumes of those things out. About 12% comes from commuting. You guys actually had recently a really great big savings in commuting because student behaviors changed. It may also be that from a sampling data, we actually got better information or asked better questions of, did you come to campus every day this week? Or where we previously were asking, how many, do you commute to campus or not? Yes, I commute to campus. Okay, we assumed 5 days. Well, what if you're at a 3-day schedule? There's actually 2 days of commuting numbers that aren't supposed to be in there. So sometimes we alter our questions and get better data that actually looks worse for us. In this instance, the data got better, and we were able to see that there were reductions in student behaviors. We think it has to do with the busing, we think some more people are walking, and that's all great. You've got a target of 2% reduction. That's going to yield about a 23% reduction by the year 2025 and 46% reduction by 2050. So unlike the campus climate commitment that our campus is a part of, we're going for 80%. You guys are shooting for 46%. It's better than 0%. I find it to be Midwestern. It's a comfortable number. We're good with 2%. Like, we know we can do that. And it's moving, and I don't want to disqualify that at all, but I don't find it aspirational. I don't find it inspirational. You're not waiting for magic to happen, so maybe it's more realistic than the program that I'm a part of. But that's something to think about, is, you know that you can do this, but if I go back to that picture of that little boy who's 2 years old looking up at me saying, "Daddy, what's my world going to be like when I'm grown up?" If you can get to 80%, that's going to be better. So you're about a 6.8% reduction in 4 years. You're on the cusp of being so much better than that based on some of the new programs that are coming out, and their acronyms that I'm lost in my head, but there's a lot of electricity savings that's going to be coming up in the very near future. So this year is going to see a significant drop, which is awesome and amazing. We had a similar drop when we switched from number 6 fuel oil over to natural gas. Early wins are oftentimes big wins. The later ones are more difficult. So the more you can do in every category, the better opportunity you have to make sort of a big thing. So green revolving funds is something that is used on lots of campuses. There's actually an organization out there that helps with this kind of stuff. But the whole idea is that, if you take a pot of money, so let's say some kind person gave you $1 million and said, "Here, go do energy savings with this." And for every project that you do with that, the money that you're saving from that has to get reinvested back into that fund, so that if it's a 5-year payback, in 5 years you've got that $1 million again, you can go out and do more projects, and then the savings beyond that are just a part of the operating budget. But the calculated savings have to come back to that fund in the beginning. So how you get that money is of debate. Sometimes you would put that out of their a reserve fund, or maybe they are able to pull it out of end-of-year funds that were a bonus, or a donor is able to come in. The Sustainable Endowment Institute is a group of people that's out there sharing good stories of people who are doing this kind of work. In a perfect world, what you would do is take money out of your endowment. You've got, I don't know how big your endowment is here, but let's just say it's $20 million. Let's invest $1 million of that in us, in our ability to do energy savings and our ability to pay ourselves back at a higher rate of return than the market is giving us. It's a proven technique, and it's working really well on a lot of campuses. So again, some things that I've talked about there. A student-funded green fee. You're kind of doing that right now with transportation, which is awesome, but is there a separate green fee that is created to look at projects that are initiated to enhance student life in a sustainable way? So we had one of these on our campus for about 2 years. It has to be voted on every 2 years by the students. We've lost that for about the last 3 years. We're hoping to put that back to a vote in about 3 weeks. So the whole idea behind it is that faculty, staff, or students can apply with projects, and that they can then go ahead and implement those for the benefit of students. And that's an important part of that. I would suggest a funding board of no more than 5 people. I've been saddled with 13 people. Do you know how easy it is to get 13 students together for an hour and a half with another administrator who only works 9 to 5? It's the bane of my existence. So resiliency commitments is another piece that I want to sort of talk about in terms of the world of sustainability. We know that climate change is coming. We know that even if all of us were perfect right now and stopped all of our emitting due to planetary systems, it's still going to get hotter in the next, say, 30 to 40 years. And that means that things are going to be different. So we know that it's going to be different. How are we going to respond? Are we ready for that? We know that there's going to be more intense water coming in. What have we done to anticipate that? Have we improved our 900,000, what are those things called? Culverts. I like viaduct, that's not really it, no. So have we improved our own culverts in anticipation of that? Have we put a green roof on top of a building so that water can get absorbed and held at that building level because it used to be grass and now we took the grass away, but we can return the grass, it gives us insulation, and it also protects the water that's going to be rushing at us and trying to rush away from us. So are those ways for us to anticipate that and mitigate that kind of a thing? So I think that it's all about looking in advance of that. Transition Towns is a really great organization. There's one here in Transition Mankato. Is anybody here from that group? You guys are. I have to reveal one little secret, if I may, and if I've mischaracterized, you can hold me to task afterwards. If you read the book Transition Towns, this is a whole concept that started in England. The whole concept is that, let's say that Armageddon is coming, and we're all going to be really animalistic about the fact that I'm going to protect my family. You at some point are not going to be able to protect your family because somebody else is going to come along who wants or needs one of your resources and will have a bigger gun than you do. This is really simplistic explanation. Am I doing a horrible job of this? Yes. Okay, we'll talk later. So if 10 or so people get together and understand that bad things could happen if we all stay disconnected from one another, why don't we get neighborhoods together? Why don't we talk about building resilience? Why don't we talk about the fact that, you've got a sewing machine, you know how to can things, I've got a snowblower, you've got a generator, he's got a chainsaw, I know how to build things, I know how to preserve foods, I know where to get a water supply, we all know each other's names, I can go pick your kid up from soccer practice. We create a much better community in the good times, and it makes it much easier for us to be resilient in the long term because we're all unified and working together. So, am I close? Okay, I got a couple of nods, so that's great. Great work that group is doing, but it's around the whole concept of resiliency. One of the great things that I just want to share with you about your own university, if the electricity has to get shut off, if for some reason a transformer blows up someplace off campus, like another tornado comes through and lifts up the entire, power grid that's feeding the campus, you've got 6 megawatts of electricity in generator power ready to turn on at a moment's notice. This university with underground power lines can power itself. It's diesel fuel, which isn't awesome from a climate standpoint, but from a resiliency standpoint, the lights will stay on, the heat will stay on, and you can still function. That's huge. That is light years ahead of where some other campuses are. My campus doesn't do that right now. We are in a very bad position. We don't have a switch to turn off. I've got a cogeneration plant that generates electricity, but when the grid goes off, we have to go off, because we can't feed anything back to that. It's not a good position to be in. So that's an impressive thing that your team has done to protect this university from damages and potential bad things. Focusing on microgrids and having the ability to island yourselves is an important thing. Again, can you maintain a food distribution system? Is there the ability to provide fresh water and sewage? Think of what your life is like without those 3 attributes. And then it becomes important why that's important. The other thing to just sort of think about as you're looking at future decisions on buildings, gray water is another thing that people are instituting. It's called the purple pipe. And basically the idea is that for things like toilet water in urinals and for watering grounds and other purposes, gray water that has been treated on site is perfectly appropriate to do that. So you can have a rain catchment basin that goes into a big cistern that can get added into that water supply, and that you can use those for non-potable purposes. We don't have to take fresh drinking water and literally throw it down the toilet. We can use a different water source to do that. And water is inexpensive at the moment and plentiful until there's a drought. And then ask South Africa. They're not in a really good place. Johannesburg is literally counting days to the point at which they are going to not have water supplies for their entire city. So I see that there's a question. So the idea of recapturing shower water is another, closed system loop, thing that could be instituted. I grew up, camping in a travel trailer, and, we were told, to brush your teeth, you run the thing underneath the thing and turn the water off, and then brush all you want to, just leave the whole thing running because you use all of the water, you use up the septic system. So how do we think in terms of what the system capacities are, as well as where is there an opportunity? The tiny house movement is being brilliant about this right now. How do you use the few resources and reuse things where possible? Composting toilets is something that's a part of that world. Personally, not a big fan of it, but it works. Using human manure for your garden is a thing, it works. Not a fan, but again, it's a thing, and you need to know that that's being used in many places. So, the American Association for Sustainability in Higher Education is our parent organization. There are over 1,500 member institutions across the country. There are 3,000-ish universities that are out there, so I'm not the unicorn that you may think that I am. There is one of me at about half of the universities around the country. And so some of you are later to getting to that game. We started in 2007 with this work. Your group has started a little bit, later than that. And that's fine. It's organically how things come along. But there's a whole group of people that are out there who are going to national conferences, who are sharing best practices, that they're doing listservs, and we're reading things on a weekly basis. Again, I come to campus every single day thinking about how I can make this a more sustainable place. How can I find a story that I can amplify good work that is being done by other people that is benefiting the rest of the campus. They have something called the STARS rating system, which again is similar to your carbon plan, your carbon impact. I'm not saying this right, your greenhouse gas emissions. That's one record of this, but it's like 10 indices. The STARS plan is 300 different things that you're looking at. What are your HR policies? What are your financing tools? Is the foundation investing in dirty fuels with their investment monies? What are the campus operations? There's 300 questions that you get to answer about all those things, and at the end you get a score, like the Olympics, gold, silver, bronze. There's a platinum that's been added as well. And it's an objective measure used by all institutions to be able to self-report and to provide a pathway for improvement in a very detailed way. And it's a very public way as well. And again, being a member of that organization gives you access to that and the ability to be able to learn more about what you're doing. GRI is another tool that's used in business. We've actually used that with the university as well. We use that with local governments, and so our cities and towns around us are also doing that. So they've got benchmark data that they can look at on an annual basis, setting goals for people for the next year. Project Drawdown, is anybody familiar with this book? 6, that's awesome. So again, the basic idea behind this, it's the most comprehensive look at doing the math of global warming and how we can be able to do these reductions. This is not fantasy, this is not science fiction, this is not something 20 years in the future we hope that maybe we'll develop some of these things. This is 100 ways that we can do this work right now. All ways that you can reduce greenhouse gases. They've all been ranked, they've all been analyzed. The number one way that we can help the world is what? Population control. That's up there. I don't remember which number specifically that is. It's land-based wind turbines. If we can really fully implement land-based wind turbines, that is the most effective one thing that we can do. Ocean-based wind turbines is number 22. But if you put the two together, it's still number 1. Until you start looking at other things, like what if we were to educate women worldwide beyond the 8th grade level? That becomes number 1 now, when combined with some other factors, because now you're looking at birth control and population control and better food systems and better water systems and better decisions that are being made on how family finances are utilized, and maybe we shouldn't go to war with our neighbor, best friends, neighboring community, other countries. Women have a moderating effect on those kinds of things, and that is far more impactful than all of the rest of the things that we have to deal with. So they actually have Project Drawdown, which is an actual competition that's coming up that people can participate in, campuses can do things with. The College and University Recycling Coalition, or CURC, is another great way to just focus on zero waste itself. They're doing a lot of really great seminars, and I've learned a ton of attending programs that they've been doing on, trying to reduce waste and focus on zero waste. I understand that Mankato has, that as a focus as well as a city, and that's really important. Here in Minnesota, there's lots of resources that you guys have. CERTS is an organization run by the state, the Clean Energy Resources Team. Each region has a person who's doing this work, and sometimes they're full-time, like in the cities and sort of the outer lands. They're half-time people. Bemidji State hired that half-time person to be a half-time person in their sustainability office. And guess who gets more grants? Bemidji State. Go figure. It's a great way to be able to sort of have an entree into having an extra set of hands around to do something. Green Step Cities, Mankato as a city is participating in that. So how do you partner with them around some of those things and speak a common language? The Department of Natural Resources are talking about biomes, and from a resiliency standpoint, when you're on sort of the verge of two different areas, what is the wooded land separate from the farmland, and how do each one of those areas have different needs? Because again, if you look at your impact in terms of a 60-mile radius in any direction, that's different biomes that are going to be affected out there. So one of our alums is actually the Minnesota Office of Enterprise Sustainability Director, just appointed in July this last year, and a great resource of somebody who's looking at sort of the statewide mobilization of how things are running. There's also regional partnerships that are going on at the terms. The last one, and this is one I had meant to talk about yesterday with the president, the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. They're actually looking at purchasing renewable energy at the larger scale. So if we can say, we need 25 megawatts of electric to be able to bring into the university. Can we partner with somebody else who needs 5 and you need 10 and you need 30, and all of a sudden now we're going to a developer saying we need a 100 megawatt field. Bless you. We need a 100 megawatt field. Can you build us that to scale? That the numbers get a lot more attractive when you build that in a larger thing. And so there's a group of people, they met in January, that they're starting that conversation. And that's a great place for you to be in. Again, 67% of your carbon emissions come from electricity alone. That is where we need to be spending so much of our efforts. So things that students can be doing. So continue this Be USA project. We got a chance to talk about that a little earlier today. It doesn't matter to me so much that the city of Mankato says you can't have beehives in the city, because that's a rule, and at some point rules are meant to be changed or evolved, and you're shaking your head saying that that's not accurate. I either don't know about that or applaud that. I'm not sure which way to go. We have all learned something today, that there's not a rule that prevents us from doing that. But if there were, again, students can advocate for the change of those kinds of things. And again, that's how things move forward. So thank you for that. That's an important part. So continue that work with B Campus. Bike-Friendly University is just another aspect of something that we can be doing. Tree Campus USA is another program through the Arbor Day Foundation, where you're actually mapping your trees and looking at how those are being managed and handled. You can focus on becoming a zero-waste campus. That is my aspirational thing. I talked with a couple of people and I'm like, I'd really like to do this. How do I do that? And they said, you go up and stand in front of a crowd and you announce that we're doing it. And then we are. And that's what I did. And now people are writing about that in documents and in annual reports. And I'm like, did I just set a goal for us? And sometimes change comes that easily and that quickly. So I surprised myself with that one. Student fee dollars. Student government has the ability to spend money on things, and one of those things typically is catering. Like we want to get a pizza party and get some people to come to our movie, and we want something to drink, and we don't always want to have soda, so we'll just get some water bottles. And why are we paying 2,000 times what we should for something that is free from the fountain? So can we as an organization make a statement that says, we're not paying for bottled water? We had a president-elect, actually an interim president who came onto campus, and the first day he walked in, he said, we're not having bottled water at any other presidential events ever while I'm here, period. And you're like, Okay, that's bold. That's leadership. That's somebody saying, this is a problem and we're not going to do it any longer. And students have the control to do that with your own fee dollars. Students on my campus are demanding that we choose 100% renewable energy where we can, and that we've transitioned to that by the year 2050. It dovetails nicely with our overall energy goals, because I can't get to an 80% reduction without getting rid of the energy that we're buying from the grid, so that's a great synergy. But it's a student movement, and they're pushing that not only with my chancellor, but also the president of the university system. They're talking with the governor about this. So they're getting a lot of press around the fact that this is something that they want, and that they value, and that's something that's important. Again, I continue to lobby with the Students United to be able to require a sustainability committee on each campus. That's a vital, important way for students to get engaged and enrolled in those kinds of things. Other things that students can be doing. Again, you've got a mandate right now that states that you should become, when you're building buildings, that there are going to be net zero by 2030. That's baked into the formula already, that you've got standards that do that. Do you really have to wait until 2030 to demand a net zero building? Do you understand what a net zero building is? Basically, most buildings leak lots of energy because we have inefficient amounts of insulation. We build a building code that says you have to have an R value of, say, 14 or 16 or 20 in the walls, and more in the ceiling. But we know that if you had an R90 wall and ceiling and an envelope, then no air is going to be penetrating that, no temperature is going to be moving from the outside to the inside of that building structure. It is physically possible to build these. It's physically possible to build them at the same budget level and to have a lower operating cost for those through their lifetimes. And again, if we're adding square footage, we can't cut greenhouse gases if we're having more greenhouse gases with more square footage. And that's the challenge that we have at my university. We're adding square footage. We've gone from 1.5 million square feet to 2.5 million square feet over the last 14 years. And all of the savings that we've made are now being lost because we've added square footage. And so that's the challenge that we have, is trying to get that to be reversed. You've been participating in Recyclemania, but you need to do more of that. You need to do better advertising and be able to co-sponsor more. And we talked a little bit about some of those logistics with some of the students of being able to get your group and your group to sign on to this and make a competition out of it. That's the heart of this whole thing. You missed it the other day, but we did have World Recycling Day. So go recycle. But that's the kind of thing that annually comes up. So next year, put that on your calendars. Be able to talk about that with all of your students. Earth Hour is actually coming up this Saturday. If you want to participate, I think it's between 8:30 and 9:30, 1 hour, you're asked to turn the lights off, to not use electricity. What else can you do with your community for an hour with a bunch of college students in the dark? I think they can figure that out. But it's a great way to be able to have fun activities that are student engaging, that don't use electricity. So bottle filling stations. This is something that we've got 25 of them on my campus. I've got another funding to do 15 more. But more importantly, we wrote that into our building guidelines. So every new building has to have that as the standard. So we're no longer putting in standard water fountains, we're putting in bottle filling stations. So again, a rule change at the building level can sometimes be a significant change. Last thing, and this is something that I just learned as I was sort of randomly researching things for this presentation, U.S. Department of Education has a Green Ribbon School program. Go online, read what the requirements are, and apply. You may be able to get an award and a designation of something for all of the good work that you're already doing. So, some other things that the campus can be doing. Again, I'm going to harp on this net zero thing a lot. Don't wait until 2030 to build this, because that's when you have to do it. The sooner you get there, the sooner you reap the savings. And if I can phrase this for you, what is the opportunity cost of waiting until then to do this work? If you had done it immediately, what are all of the additional savings that you could have been reaping? And again, we do this with solar panels all the time. I tell people that I just bought solar panels and put them on, and people are like, well, they're getting more and more efficient. I'm going to wait for a little while until that gets doubled or tripled, and it's going to be really amazing. I'm like, how long have you had this thought? 10 years. I'm like, really? Because in about 6 years, you could have paid for that entire system and making free electricity for the last 4 years with the old inefficient panels. So what are we waiting for? Why are we waiting that long to get to something that is technically feasible and ultimately is a better return on our investment and a life cycle cost analysis. So that's one of those things. There are some campuses that are doing living building challenges. What a living building challenge is where literally everything for that building in terms of water and electricity and heat all comes from the site itself. So if you want water for your bathrooms, then they need to be caught from a rainwater catchment system. All electricity to run any of those systems have to be run from the solar panels that come as a part of that project. Oberlin is a really great example of a living machine where they then also treat their sewage through a set of plants and through a series of aqueducts that move that through and return that back to the campus. So it's a great example of the ability to even go further beyond. People look at me like I have three heads when I talk about net zero. There's crazier stuff out there than that. Living building is a part of that, but that's even not as far out as some other things are. People have heard about the LEED standards for building buildings. Basically, it's a standard by which we can build efficient buildings that are energy and construction savvy in doing so. They have the same thing for sites landscapes. So basically, you're applying this similar type of principles to the landscaping that you're going to be doing. So you're getting xeriscaping and native plants to be put in, so you're not saying, oh, let me put all these ornamental flowers and shrubs in that are going to die in 3 years and we have to replant them, or we're going to have to put annual flowers in here every single year, so how can we use perennials and other kinds of things to be able to provide us with a constant source. Committing to zero waste. You can do zero waste as an event, you can do it as a building, or you could do that as eventually as the entire university. So we actually had Jane Goodall come to campus a couple of years ago and introduced the first zero waste event where we fed 800 kids pizza and made sure that we recycled and composted all of the products as a result of that. Again, walked into the food service staff and said, hey, I want to do this. And they looked at me like I had three heads, and I'm accustomed to that at this point. And the more we did the work, they're like, oh, actually, that's not difficult, and we have access to that, and that's easy, and it didn't cost me any more than it would have otherwise. So there's this assumption that things are always more expensive when they're sustainable, and that's just not true. So the 1 Million Trees program is something that your alumni office could look at, and basically it's pledging to be able to print their alumni magazine on recycled paper. Start with 30% content, move yourselves up to 100%, maybe move it to tree-free at some point, because that's, again, technically possible today. Some other things that I think would be beneficial. You have a sustainability and an environmental team right now. You've got a committee. But how are we working to make sure that all of our vice presidents have worked with that group and rotated through that, so that in addition to some people being on it consistently, which is important, we also need to make sure that the provost understands what we're talking about, or people in your foundation. And all of those senior leaders need to have that philosophy and understand the impact that big decisions are being made, because you're the group that decides the direction of the university. So having them have more information and access to what this committee is doing is going to help inform them about that sort of consequence of decisions, and understanding how we can shake loose some resources to be able to make those kinds of goals happen. I would consider, and this is a minor thing, consider naming the environmental committee the sustainability committee. It is a broader context that includes both society as well as economy. I think it provides a more standard platform within the industry and helps prepare your students with a new language set that's going to prepare them for life outside of the university. I would encourage you to join ASHE. It is the parent organization. It is the group from which most of this information comes, and do the STARS rating. You do need this committee to get into the world of social media. And I say this understanding as the Facebook webmaster for our own campus's piece. It's time consuming, and I know that you don't have the time. And it takes someone to be able to manage this sharing of information. And this is where students live, and I'm using our Facebook platform, and half of my students are saying, we don't use that anymore. We're all on Snapchat, and I refuse to go on Snapchat because seldom do good things happen as a result of Snapchat, as our judicial students, our officers will tell us. But Instagram and Twitter and whatever the next thing is going to be is where we need to live, because we need to be in touch with our students. So when I created a shower thing, it wasn't just a shower web portal, it's an app. because people like apps. And so that's where we're living with that. So right now, your Facebook page for the Environmental Committee has 39 likes. So if everybody here is on Facebook, could you please go to the Environmental Committee? What is the address? Green Campus? So Mankato Green Campus? We'll have that for you by the end. So if you could all go on there and like that, it would help to drive traffic up. It will help give you access to information about all the good work that this group is doing. So we'll get you the name at the end here. Shameless Star Wars plug, I actually showed all 3 Star Wars of the first trilogy here when I was a projectionist. But as Chancellor Palpatine has said, you cannot innovate by committee. You can't. It's just physically impossible to do because committees are not by nature innovative. They are reactive and sometimes problem-solving, but they're not innovative. And that returns me to sort of this original place. Mankato needs a sustainability champion. You cannot amplify this disparate amount of stories with a committee. You can't highlight the good work that is already going on and have somebody technically competent to be able to speak the variety of languages without having someone doing that as a full-time basis. It's a puzzle. It's a really big puzzle. I've been doing this work for 8 years, and every single day I learn. And I'm like a sponge, and I get so excited about these things that I'm learning, and my wife, God love her, when I come home, she's like, how was your day? It's like a 20-minute diatribe of, did you know this about battery storage? And generally the answer is no, and the next answer is I don't care, but she's at least patient with me enough to say, that's interesting, that's awesome that you care about these things, and that you're trying to help move that ball a little bit further down towards the goalpost. And what I need to tell her and everybody else is that there's not just one ball. We've got 175 of them. And we're all trying to move each one of them a little bit each direction. And if I can make sure that this group has a little bit of energy and that one has some more information and this one has access to talk to somebody, we're able to see that bigger picture and pull all of these different pieces together. I return to now the other child in the household. This is Nate when he was about 2. He's the reason we're doing this. This isn't because I want to save money. Saving money is good. It's important. We need to save the planet. We need to save our ability to exist on this planet. That is why we are doing this. If we don't do this, his life is going to be worse, his children's lives are going to be awful, and we're very likely not far away from the cockroaches. It's not a joke. It's real. It's happening. It's now. It's us. And we have the responsibility to make those changes because we can. If, in the end, we are educational, if we are aspirational, and we are inspirational, we can get to the end. Unfortunately, that thing we were talking about with the polar bears, we didn't really, they were cuddly and they were cute, they're actually dying. This is real. There's a video from a group from the National Geographic Society where it is illegal to feed bears, found the dying polar bear. Now, I don't know if this polar bear is dying from climate change. I cannot tell you that. What I can tell you in the next 30 years is that 80% of our polar bears are going to die because of climate change. Starving polar bears are not pretty. Starving people are less so. So with that uplifting moment, I get up every day and I love this work. I love the ability to talk to students, to inspire, and to hopefully light and ignite within them the ability to ask questions, the ability to not take no for an answer, to be able to push forward and say, we need this, we deserve this. The more you read about this field, there are some people who say, it's not going to affect me, it's their problem. Well, we were the ones that created that problem, along with everybody else over the last 150 years who chose to use fossil fuels. We cannot fault third world economies like India for saying, we'd kind of like to have an American standard of living as well, and there's 1.6 billion of us, and we live in a place that's so hot that our shoes actually stick in the pavement because it's so hot it's melting. I'd like some air conditioning too. That's not okay. okay for us to say, you can't have our standard of living because it's going to emit too much carbon. This is a global problem, but we have the ability to fix things now. There are decisions each one of us can make. There are things that we can do as an institution, and there are responsibilities we have to transfer that information out to our community members to inspire them to be able to do things as well. To answer Paul's question, does it really matter that we at MSU are doing what we are doing? That answer is yes. Because part of what we are doing here is we are educating that next generation so that you go out into your jobs, and when you go into a new place and somebody says, well, we just throw away half of the desk because we had to borrow parts of it to send to some angry person who wanted to have, had an error in shipping and didn't have all of his parts, and we just didn't know what to do with the rest, so we had to throw them away. You say, no, why would we throw that away? Why are we going to waste all of those resources? When you ask questions and advocate for change, people are going to be listening. The kids at Parkland High School said, it is enough that for the last 35 years, actually the last 17 years since Columbine started, there have been school shootings on a regular basis. Newtown, Connecticut, not the least of which is not far from where I live. I know people that were affected by this. You've, as adults, have done nothing to stop the gun violence. And whether you call it gun violence or if you call it mental health issues, the reality is people are still shooting up schools, and we're targets, and we are the ones who are going to stand up because this is our generation and we are protecting ourselves. I believe that sustainability is a similar type of flashpoint for us, and we have the opportunity to do that. Thank you for your time and for coming out tonight. I hope that this was somewhat informational for you, hopefully inspirational as well, and I'd be happy to take questions if and when you have them. So we've got some microphones that are available. Would you mind?
So what we're going to do...
Okay, yeah. So I saw one brave soul having a question in the middle, so let's start there.
I can talk about it.
Well, we are recording this, so it's always helpful to have you on mic as well.
Yeah, thanks. Jamie, I'm wondering if you have received any pushback from people who think this is all a waste of time and money.
Everybody loves all of my ideas all of the time. And if that was true, I have a bridge to sell you as well. Of course. It's funny. I've been at the institution for 17 years. I have a bit of social cachet that's been built up in that time. I've been a supportive sort of team player. My nature is not to aggressively push things. I generally try to cajole as much as I can and convince and collaborate. So as a style, I'm not threatening. But I'm also finding my voice. And I'm just moving from our Student Affairs Division over into our capital planning team. I've been attending their staff meetings for 3 years, and I've been listening to, we're going to fix this and do that, and I'm coming more to the table with, that's great that we're going to build potentially this new building, but how are we heating that? Oh, we're going to put it on the steam plant. Okay, do we have capacity? Yes. Okay. Have we considered ground source heat pumps, and have we looked at the greenhouse gas difference between those two? No. Maybe we should do that before we get too much farther down the road. We're not there yet, but that's a good thought. So I'm trying to plant seeds where I can. I also, in talking, came back from I was actually at a conference, and texted our capital planning person. I'm like, oh my God, I just learned about this sites program, and how can we do LEED standards for our, landscaping designs? Have you considered that? He's like, yeah, we looked at it, we're not doing it. I'm like, that's a punch in the gut, but okay, not the hill I'm going to die on today. So how do you sort of work with finding where the pressure points are, finding where there's opportunities, finding where there's synergy, where there's other people doing good work? How do I help amplify that work? And, sort of surf the tides. And sometimes you have to find the hill to die on because it's that important. And how do you do that in a diplomatic way? And as our new chancellor says, it's important to be able to work together and disagree, but not be disagreeable. And again, as a style, I think that's something well noted.
Since I have this, I'm going to ask one more question, then I yield, and I will. You didn't mention anything about divestment or carbon-free investments at the university endowment level. And that's pretty big on a lot of campuses. Could you comment on that, please?
Sure. About 4 years ago, our students started advocating for that. The UMass Amherst campus is our flagship, and they love to demonstrate about, the wrong color soda can was put in the soda machine, up to we should be divesting from fossil fuels. So the new president of the university system heard that, and we actually initially divested from coal. Of course, we had to stop burning coal on the campuses first, and then we could divest from it in our portfolio, and then later in the spring, we were able to move the foundation, which is its own separate entity, not the university, to divest from that and put a social screen in as far as future investments were going to be made. So yeah, we did a lot of that work, and it was 4 years in the making, largely pushed by students. And again, that is another one of those political conversations that we had as directors is, this is an issue for us. Do we write it into our policy and have the risk of our policy being rejected in its entirety, or do we allow our students to take the lead and support them as best we can and occasionally send a pizza over while they're sitting in the president's office protesting this? So how can we support them without directly supporting them because they're doing similar kind of work and that we would advocate for but don't want to directly take that on? So I think part of that is being politically savvy to not stick our neck out when we don't need to. But that is a really big issue within the collective thing. One of the things I've learned from the carbon commitment people is that it is entirely possible and actually in the better interests of an institution to use foundation money to invest in clean, renewable things and to not invest in the non-renewable energies, because if those non-renewable energies are causing climate change and potential death of all people, that's not in our long-term best interests to support those things. So from an ethical standpoint, as an investor, we can justify the opposite, as opposed to solely focusing on rate of return. They have a better rate of return, but they're going to kill us. We actually care about that, and as investors can. It depends on who you ask, I think. So there are actual funds that are propping up to be able to do that. So, other questions? I think we've got one back here.
All right, thanks for coming. I am an alumni. I just graduated in May, actually.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And I was given the idea of the Bee Friendly Campus, and I actually started that movement here, and the environmental committee was amazing and absorbed it and just took it on with me, and that was great. Unfortunately, I graduated with little time to work on it, so I had to hand it off quick and try to figure out how it was going to keep going. So my main question is, you've been talking about movements and things, and just with the last question that it had student support, and my biggest thing was that I could not get fast enough, really, but student support to keep movements going and to get them to use their voices, as many don't realize that they have the voice here at a college and university to make those changes and to tell the president or tell higher-ups that we can make these things happen. Little changes like planting a bee garden really aren't that hard to get done if we just ask for it. So how do you get the students to rally up and do that?
So I think one of the things that I've learned in my time is that as the convener of those stories and projects and ideas, I need to be patient. And I'll use my garden as an example. So we have a garden out behind one of our residence halls, and a student club created it. Come to find out, it actually is the actual garden site that was used by the little farmhouse that's there, and it turns out that that farmhouse was actually built by a Revolutionary War soldier after he retired from the Revolutionary War. We have one of those on our campus. I'm like, really? I thought it was just the farmhouse. Our farmhouse has a story. It actually has a garden that belonged to it that this club kind of stumbled into and fenced off and tried to make a go of. And it ran for a little while, and then it kind of was left alone, and then we've put more energy into it, and then it went away, and then a class came in, and they took some responsibility, and we started talking about permaculture as a philosophy, and how do we get that, and that infused itself into the curriculum, and now we're trying to figure out what our funding model is so that I can be able to keep the permaculturalist, and oh my gosh, a faculty line opened up, and we were able to get the permaculturalist into that, and this is 7 years, and it's not been smooth, and it has not been awesome, and what we've realized is that our garden is too far away from where our people are, and no one knows about it. And so that permaculturalist now is teaching her class and is building her permaculture edible garden next to a residence hall. And we're going to take our garden to where the people are rather than asking the people to come to where the garden is. And so as the convener of that idea, it's my job to keep that at the forefront. It's to be able to find those people and have that energy put back into that wherever we possibly can. And sometimes it takes a long time. I've got 17 different ideas that we're holding on to. We are a concrete campus made of fluted concrete, and lots of opportunities to do moss art on them. We've got lots of structures. We've got approval to do this. We've got a formula to do this. We've got art students that can go out there and paint using moss, and they can make these great sculptures out of them. 7 years I've been trying to get somebody to actually do it. And it's a great idea, and we've got literally approval for everything to do. I just need somebody to come in and say, okay, here's all the dimensions, and here's the contest, and show me your design, and I'll approve it, and here's the mixture, and we all going to, so these things take time sometimes, and so having a historian around that knows those stories and tries to keep that energy alive is an important part of that formula. So congratulations for starting something. I know a lot of us start things and they never go anywhere, but sometimes you've done some of that legwork and you have to trust that the next person's going to carry the baton a little bit further, and maybe they're going to stumble, and maybe they're going to forget that they're racing for a little while, but at some point somebody else is going to pick that up and go, didn't we talk about this at some other time? And we're able to circle back and pull some of that energy back into it. So be patient. Sorry, I had to.
Thank you.
Back here, another question.
Hi, so I actually am in a social change class right now, and we are focusing on the plastic water bottle usage here on campus, and we are looking towards employing potentially the sale of boxed water, but I guess one major thing you talked about, the refillable bottle stations. We have come in contact with quite a few people who have a false belief that the water there is unclean. I was just wondering if you have come across the same people and how you kind of combat that false belief.
So early on, we had that challenge. I have 137 water fountains on campus that are in, anywhere from 2 years old to 57 years old. They're nasty and disgusting. And again, when things turn into that level of disrepair where either the water doesn't come out or it dribbles out, or the assumption is everyone's put their mouth on that thing. I don't know who puts their mouth on those. But we have this sort of fear, don't we? Like, ooh, germs, right? So one of the things that we did was we conducted water tests in terms of like a beverage challenge kind of a thing. So here we have at temperature, the same temperature, bottled water, tap water, and filtered water, and did blind taste tests with people. And again, what we found is that tap water wins straight up by, at the same temperature. So stick it in an open container in the refrigerator, get all of these waters to be the same temperature. Tap water wins. Filtered water is next. Bottled water is last. Consistently. And we're talking, it's like 40%, 30%, whatever's left over. Is that 30% still? Okay, so it's a little more dramatic than that. But I mean, bottled water it never comes up, I would think, above 15% in terms of the overall scores. So that's a really great way to be able to illustrate to people, this is on our campus, it's right here, right now, it's inexpensive to be able to do, it's a time function, and you don't need advertising for it. You just do a quick pop-up shop, and here's a table, and hey, you want to take a test? And, it's about the personality of the people who are drawing people into that, to be able to get them to participate. So that's a great educational tool to be able to illustrate that point. And again, how do you identify filling stations on campus? That's one of our, issues of, they're in so many of the buildings, but where in the building is it? And I can't quite find it. And do you have a big marker of some sort? Somebody was like, well, you should have a map. And I'm like, great, what would that look like? Every building has one, like from the outside, it's a big place. So, you have to go down to the floor level, and is it pictures, or is it a lit beacon that says, with a water drop on it, or, some creative thing that a graphic artist can come up with. So having good signage. But I think that's having people sampling and tasting. Again, the reporter does a man on the street sort of, quiz every week. Can you front load that with, can you ask people about this? And can you do a before and an after with them? Can you write articles and letters to the editor? And hey, everybody, we're going to do this sampling test, and we need your input, and come find us on the mall.
Perfect, thank you.
Certainly.
Hi again.
Hello.
Probably 30 plus or 40 years I've been interested in the subject matter, and I kind of remember way back when that sustainability wasn't the word at that time, but kind of like the voices crying in the wilderness, you hear a little bit about this and a little bit about that, and started getting people's attention, and they, people nodding their heads the right way. And over time, it's kind of been a groundswell, grassroots efforts of bringing this to the point where we saw ourselves in the last year or two. But it seems like maybe the current political climate is not so much in support. An encouraging politic it helps get things done. You get support, you get money, you get recognition, that sort of thing. Seems like there's kind of disincentives out there. Do you have any sort of misgivings or any sour feeling in your gut about what might be happening in a political pressure on what we're trying to do here?
So it's a great point. I will say that it's like the daily news is a daily punch in the gut. And it's not just one, it's like 9 or 7 or 12, depending on what bad news has come out that day. This is not an easy field to be in at the moment. Except it is, because when Trump announced, as for example, that he thought the Paris Accords were hooey and we were going to unsign from that document, technically he can't, because you have to wait for 4 years, and that's technically the day or two after the next election is effective. So if he's not elected again, then he can't, but if he is, then he could. So that's that complicated Venn diagram of, overlapping things. But again, just that symbolic, him saying, we're out, that's it. Except he's not in charge of my university. And my chancellor stood up and said, we're still in. And the mayor of our town said, we're still in. And our governor said, we're still in. And the president of the University 5 campus system said, we're still in. And Apple and Google and Oracle and everybody else, 2,500 different entities all stood up and said, we're still in. The state of California is the 6th largest economy in the world. They're still in. It doesn't really matter that one person's opinion has said that he thinks that we're out, because he doesn't really represent we any longer when 2,500 entities all step forward and says, no, we got this. We're still doing it. We decide where our dollars go towards energy savings, and we're doing it. So seeing that level of commitment allows me to get up every day and continue to do this work. But it's not easy. I'm also that person who has now started to yell at the news. I never thought I would sort of end up at that, yelling at the television, because, that's not the way it is. But my family is accustomed to that at this point, so. Because they're also yelling various things at the same time, so. So, any other questions that I can attempt to answer before we're done? In the back over here. These are great questions, by the way. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Yulia, and I I'm a student here, but you were mentioning a lot of times about your zero waste program for the whole campus, and I've been trying to go zero waste for quite a long time, and it's a lot of effort for even one person, and I can't imagine how you will do it for the whole campus, because recycling and composting is a great thing, but here we come, like, when we were talking about the dining center that is on campus right now and the composting system there, I was in part of student government at this moment, and they were like, why don't we compost at CSU? And the reason why is because it's too far away, and the composting will have to be right here, and then it will be disturbing for students, which I think is silly for the campus to think like that. But then, let's say I want to get coffee on campus, and the cups that they're using are not recyclable. The plastics, like lids for them, are not recyclable. And then, like, how hard it is to change that. But then also they will not take, so like I have reusable mug that I use, but they will not take it to refill it. So I'm like limited in options of coffee that I can get, which I'm bitter about, but it's okay. But besides those little things, like what examples and like what are your steps in getting to a zero waste campus? Because it's a huge program, and I respect that.
Again, it's aspirational of us to get there. If you press me long enough on this issue, do I think that we're going to get there by 2025? Don't tell anybody, but no. Are we going to get to more than 26%? And therein lies the value. If we can try to shoot for the stars, maybe we're going to at least get off the ground. Maybe we're at least going to get half of the way there. And in the process, how many other people are we going to inspire and educate with this as a value, this as a prospect? We were talking earlier today, Colin Beaven had done a project called No Impact Man, 10, 15 years ago. Actually, it was from two towns over from where I work now, but he was in New York City and did this experiment. Can I have no impact on my surroundings for an entire year? Like when I go to the store to buy meat, can I buy red meat without buying that stupid styrofoam thing and then the little panty liner thing they stick on it and then wrap it in saran wrap? Can I not have those things? And the answer is yes. You can bring your own glass jars, mason jars, and bring them in and find the right butcher, and he will put them in there and you will close them up, and then you've gotten meat that you carry home and walk up your 3 flights because you're not using the elevator anymore. And you can do this. And it takes an extraordinary amount of energy to do those things, but you can. And as a campus, I think that those are the lessons. What are the things that are possible? Did you ever envision having a new dining hall that has virtually no food waste going into the garbage? It's remarkable. All the I got a tour of this thing. It's the pre-production waste, it's post-production, it's every single plate scraping. The reusable silverware goes in, the plates go in, and all of the napkins get scraped off, and the hamburgers, and they get chopped up, and they get sent out to the thing, and they go into the barrel, and the barrel goes in the kitchen, into the freezer, and then it goes out the little stairs or down the ramp, and then it gets taken away, and it's remarkable. How hard would it be to do a collection program here, and then the things are on wheels. Like, wheel the thing a half a block to their cooler and stick it in there. That's not hard. It just requires someone to do it. And so, again, life will present us with problems. There are challenges all of the time. But how is it that we creatively can look at that problem and say, okay, what are our options? What are our resources? What are the possibilities? If our value is to be a zero-waste campus, how are we going to tackle this specific problem? And if it takes you 4 years to figure that out, okay, you did it. And you were able to solve that one specific problem. I have 178 problems that I'm trying to solve simultaneously. And some of them we're doing better than others, and some of them are more quickly implemented than others. We came up with the idea of trying to get on board with this bike share thing. 7 years ago, we're like, that sounds really cool. We could share bikes, and people don't have to own it, and somebody else just fixes the stuff, and I don't have to, pay, and I don't have to travel it on top of my Honda to have a rack. And I went to graduate school, and I had to borrow a bike rack from somebody else so I could stick the thing on top of the Honda because it doesn't fit in the car. Not everybody's able to overcome some of those logistics. Why don't we just rent these? 7 years later, I'm still trying to solve that problem. They changed the technology 3 times. There's now new opportunities that didn't exist when we were previously looking at that issue. So when is it that we're just doggedly determined to make sure that these are our values, here is how we're trying to attack some of solving those challenges and problems, working collaboratively with a table of people that have different colored shoes from one another, to look at that problem and look at those opportunities. And when a student group steps forward and says, we're going to take responsibility for carting those things from that space to that space. Collect it, we'll move it. What's somebody going to say? No? So when is a good idea a good idea? When do you just have to be able to solve the problems creatively? I think that's my encouragement for you. And don't take no for an answer. Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
I think we're out of time at this point.
Yeah, so I'm usually, as my students know, always the bearer of bad news. And so we have somebody else coming in to this space, and so we have to kind of move out. But I don't know, Jamie, would you be okay with sort of out in the hallway?
I'd be happy to
more
go
questions
continue
or chatting?
conversations.
Okay.
But more than
And so what we'll do is we'll kind of scooch our way out of here. I want to thank Jamie, a wonderful presentation, even hearing students talking about it on, while they were signing the review sheet, or the attendance sheet. So thank you so much. If we get a round of applause for Jamie here.
And if I may, thank you to the committee for bringing me here. To you and to Lou and to Karen, and you guys have really been terrific, giving me the opportunity to see my own alma mater with a new set of eyes, and to really be excited and impressed with the work that is going on here. I don't always see this level of commitment and broad support on other campuses, and you've got a lot to be proud of here. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, and thanks for your interest. Yeah, thank you.